to myself, we have Dr. Sharon Dane, a collaborator of mine who received her PhD in social psychology from the University of Queensland. Sharon works as a researcher and has done research in general into the health and well-being of sexual minorities since 2003. She is a spokesperson for Australian marriage equality and psychologist for marriage equality, and has presented the findings of her research into the 2009 Senate inquiry hearing into the amendment to the Marriage Act. Sharon has also been with her partner Elaine for 11 years, recently getting married in 2008 in Toronto, a marriage that isn't legally recognised here in Australia. I would also like to welcome Shelley Argent, who received Senior Queenslander of the Year in 2011 and an Order of Australia medal. Shelley came to experience her role in the same-sex marriage movement through a different path to Sharon. Shelley's eldest son, James, came out as gay to her when he was in year 12, and Shelley took this really seriously. She began learning more and more about this topic until coming into her current role as the president of the Brisbane chapter of PFLAG, Parents and Friends of Lesbian and Gays, where she's been the spokesperson for this organisation for the last 5 years. Shelley has also written a book, been on Australian Story, and the list goes on. And then we move to myself, who again has come to this through a different path. I'm a social psychologist, and what I'm really interested in is health and well-being of individuals, groups, communities. And so I really come just purely through the research into the issue of same-sex marriage, and that's the angle that I'm going to talk about tonight. So I think the first question to address is why same-sex marriage might be important to psychologists and UQ in general. To begin with, the University of Queensland has a strong commitment to research excellence, to innovation and openness. It also has a commitment to engaging with communities at the local and global level, and this includes engaging with issues of importance to local and global communities. Psychologists, conversely, if we look to the American Psychological Association or the Australian Psychological Society, both say that their aim is not only to understand the human mind, human interactions and groups, but also to apply psychological research and findings for the betterment of community health and eventually to improving people's lives. And for this reason, from UQ's commitment to the role of psychologists, I think it's particularly important that we've all turned our scientific lens to the issue of same-sex marriage. This is something that has been in the news almost every day for the past year. In the last week, we've seen 4 states, by popular vote, legalise same-sex marriage in the United States. We've seen a Senate inquiry this year, and so on and so forth. Understandably, people have a lot of questions about same-sex marriage. First of all, are there any benefits to marriage? Second of all, how does marriage equality or lack thereof impact on same-sex attracted people? And relatedly, how does having 2 mums or 2 dads impact on the kids of these unions? What's the difference between a civil union and a marriage? And so on and so forth. I'm going to talk to all these issues tonight before going on and chatting about some of the research that we've undertaken here at UQ. So to begin with, what are the benefits of a happy marriage? Would Darcy and Elizabeth have been just as content living together? The answer to that is probably no. On average, what we see is that married couples enjoy a number of benefits. They say that they're more committed to one another, but they also enjoy better psychological health and better physical health. They are literally happier and healthier. Interestingly, cohabiting couples do not enjoy these same benefits. In fact, cohabiting couples on average are less happy and healthy than their married counterparts. And this isn't just an issue of self-selection. It's not that happy and healthy people get married. It's that marriage, for whatever reason, confers some sort of a benefit to people in it. We suspect that it's probably because of the special place that marriage holds in society. It gains a tremendous amount of social support around that relationship. So what impact does marriage equality or lack thereof have on same-sex attracted people? In order to address this, I think we first have to look at the mental health of the same-sex attracted population in Australia and elsewhere. I don't think it's going to come as any surprise to most of you that same-sex attracted people, that is, gay and lesbian people, experience far worse mental health outcomes than do straight people. For example, here in Australia, gay and lesbian people are twice as likely to experience homelessness, twice as likely to experience a psychological disorder, 3 times as likely to have had suicidal thoughts, 4 times as likely to have actually put these thoughts into action and made a suicide attempt, 5 times as likely to have made plans for their own suicide. They're more likely to smoke cigarettes, to have drug and alcohol problems. The list goes on. We are talking about a health crisis in real terms among gay and lesbian people. So people sensibly asked, what is it about being gay or being lesbian that actually negatively impacts on health? Is there something inherent that causes both same-sex attraction and mental health issues? Professor Meyer from Columbia University asked this question, but he actually developed a competing hypothesis. What he proposed is that there was nothing inherently problematic about being gay or lesbian, but rather the amount of discrimination and prejudice faced by gay and lesbian people was negatively affecting their mental and physical health. He conducted large-scale surveys in New York and found that, indeed, this appears to be the case. To the extent that gay and lesbian people face prejudice and discrimination, they are also more likely to experience demoralisation, have suicidal thoughts, and so on. The prejudice that gay and lesbian people face can be so intense that they can actually internalise it, and this appears to be the most poisonous form of prejudice, where on the one hand you know that you yourself are gay, and on the other hand you believe that there is something inherently wrong and inherently bad about being gay. Those gay and lesbian people who suffer from this internalised prejudice by far face the worst health outcomes. Prejudice is pretty direct, and it leads to the question of how actually denying marriage to a people could have any negative outcomes. The strangely named psychologist Hatzenbuehler did a study in the United States from 2001 to 2005, where he looked at the health and well-being of gay and lesbian Americans in states that either had bans on marriage equality or who allowed marriage equality. During this 4-year period, what he found was that gay and lesbian people who lived in states that banned marriage equality suffered from about a 40% increase in mood disorders, so we're talking depression and things like this. A 250% increase in generalised anxiety disorders, and a 40% increase in alcohol abuse. This is compared to gay and lesbian people who lived in states where marriage equality was allowed. We saw no mental health detriments in this group. It's important to note that the mental health of gay and lesbian people didn't come at the cost of straight people. We didn't see any mental health decrements in straight Americans who lived in states where marriage equality had become legal. Relatedly, a psychologist called Horn looked at how denying marriage equality might impact on friends and family members of gay and lesbian people. What they found, their research team found, is that friends and family members, like Shelley in the front row, felt that they suffered a significant amount of stress as a result of their loved ones being denied marriage, mainly centering around concern for the mental health and well-being of their loved ones. So this is the horrible side of the story, but the nice side of the story comes from research that we have in countries and states within the United States where gay marriage has been allowed. So the Netherlands legalised same-sex marriage in 2001. So we now have 11 years to actually look at this, and we see various countries following, like Canada, Spain, etc. Research from the Netherlands, conducted 3 years after marriage equality was made legal, found that same-sex attracted married couples, so 2 men or 2 women, who had gotten married, reported that the result of their marriage was those less tangible benefits. They said that they felt more included and they felt more accepted. They felt more normal. Research conducted by Professor Badgett in the United States in Massachusetts on a massive, over 500 same-sex attracted couples, also asked these married couples, how marriage changed their relationship. About 70% reported that they felt that their relationship was stronger and closer after getting married. Around the same number reported that they felt more accepted by society. Strangely enough, the legal concerns that we might have thought would be important in terms of marriage equality, so feeling that you're safe and protected, were less important than those less tangible emotional and psychological benefits. I think, again, it's important to see if this comes at the cost of straight marriage, because we have to always look at both sides. In Denmark, Norway and Sweden, where same-sex marriage has been legalised, in the 3 years following the legalisation of same-sex marriage, what we have seen is actually an increase in heterosexual marriage and, on average, a 30% drop in divorce rates. We can't connect these or understand these links. However, it does appear that we don't see straight marriage decline while same-sex marriage increases. When we talk about marriage, I think we have to talk about kids, because this is something people ask me about all the time, what the psychological research says on two mums or two dads. A lot of people, I think, have really justified concerns. They want to know, do two mums or two dads hurt kids? Is there going to be a detriment in terms of their education, in terms of their health? A little boy's going to be able to grow up and be young men, a little girl's going to grow up and be young women. Psychologists are interested in this too, and we've been researching this now, starting with lesbian mums in the 50s. And here's what we find. With many hundreds of studies, overall, the body of research shows that a little kid raised by two mums or two dads, or even a mum and a dad, is indistinguishable from one another. In terms of health, in terms of psychological well-being, in terms of cognitive abilities, down to grade point average, you cannot tell the difference between a child raised by two mums or two dads or a mum and a dad. In fact, it seems that there is something special about having a mum and a mum or a dad and a dad, insofar as a two-parent family is the optimal solution for a child. The American Academy of Pediatrics naturally was interested in this issue, so they actually conducted their own extensive review. This is an academy comprising some 60,000 members. They found that we're not talking about hypothetical kids, we're talking about kids that already exist. In the United States, they found that 1 in 3 lesbian couples are raising children. Here in Australia, the stats are about 1 in 5, raising to 50%, 1 in 2 of lesbians of childbearing age. They found that 1 in 5 gay couples are already raising children. This is comparable to around the 45% of straight couples that are currently raising children. Interestingly, what they also found that of same-gender partners raising children, two mums, two dads, about 40% had been together for 5 years or longer, and this is in comparison to of opposite sex, a mum and a dad, unmarried couples, where only 20% of heterosexual unmarried couples had stayed together for that duration. This led the American Academy of Pediatrics to come out quite strongly and say that there are no demonstrable differences between a child raised by two mums, two dads, or a mum and a dad on cognitive, emotional, behavioural indices. In fact, they concluded that it's far more the structure and relationship between family members than exactly what that relationship looks like that determines a child's well-being. This brings us to the issue of civil unions. What I've shown you over the last few slides is that marriage can be very beneficial and that denying marriage has demonstrable harm. Does it then follow that civil unions would be a good backup? My colleague, Dr. Sharon Dane, in her study Not So Private Lives, which looked at Australian data following the legalisation of same-sex de facto couples, asked this very question: how do you, as lesbian and gay Australians, want your relationship to be recognised? She found that lesbian and gay people, very much like straight people, devalue civil unions. They don't take them as seriously. While 55% of gay couples said that they would like to get married if that was legal, only 15% said that they would take the civil union option. Further to that, of couples that had a civil union, 77% said they would prefer marriage. I think that this does relate back to the civil rights debate, and I have a little cartoon here. We have one drinking fountain called marriage and a separate one called civil unions. As was very much the case in the United States during segregation, separate but equal appears to never really be that equal. So in my last couple of minutes, and I'm aware that I'm running out of time, I'm just going to briefly talk about some research from UQ that I conducted in collaboration with my colleague Dr. Sharon Dane, as well as Parathat Tekaseri, and a bit of a tricky name to pronounce, and Catstalk Brett. What we wanted to know is how the ongoing debate actually affected same-sex attracted Australians. So we wanted to go beyond knowing how same-sex marriage affected same-sex attracted Australians to actually knowing how opposing or supporting same-sex marriage made them feel. What we did is we got a large number of gay and lesbian Australians, 514, and a large number of straight Australians, 300 people, to fill out our survey. What we did at the start, however, is we exposed them to media articles that either vehemently opposed same-sex marriage and said that this was very wrong, or vehemently supported same-sex marriage and said that this was very right. What we found for same-sex attracted people, gay and lesbian youth, a population that we know is already at risk, even a short exposure to an article opposing same-sex marriage made them feel more negative and depressed. And critically, they reported that they felt more lonely and alone. In addition, they were more likely to report that they felt weak and powerless, that they didn't have control over their own lives. In addition, we wanted to know how contact with people who opposed gay marriage impacted on gay and lesbian Australians. We asked them, how often do you talk to or run into or spend time with someone who opposes same-sex marriage? What we found was a very clear link. People, same-sex attracted Aussies, gay and lesbian youth who spent more time with people who oppose same-sex marriage were more likely to report self-hatred. They were more likely to agree with items like, I think I would be better off dead than gay. They were more likely to feel that having a healthy, positive and extended relationship was out of reach for them. They were more likely to agree with statements such as, long relationships just aren't possible for gay people. It's not possible to have an enduring lesbian relationship. The more contact that they had with people who oppose same-sex marriage, the more that they reported they felt at risk of physical and verbal assault. They were more likely to agree with things like, I expect to be bit, punched, hit, spat on, etc. They were more likely to feel unsatisfied about their life and feel that their future didn't contain much hope. We also looked at how exposure to these articles impacted on straight Australians. Again, we always want to see if mental health benefits to same-sex attracted Aussies comes at a cost of straight Aussies' mental health. What we found was very clear. Like same-sex attracted Australians, straight Australians, on average, who saw the articles supporting same-sex marriage, felt happier and more positive in general. For them, the more contact that they had with people who actively opposed same-sex marriage, the more likely that they themselves were to display homophobia, to say things like, I feel that lesbians are sick and that gay men are perverted or disgusted. What this study shows in general is that opposition to marriage equality isn't removed from the mental health of same-sex attracted Aussies. There is a clear and direct and immediate negative impact of opposing same-sex marriage on the health and happiness of same-sex attracted Australians. This is in our data. So I'm going to end with a little bit of fact-checking. I know that a lot of rhetoric flies around about same-sex marriage, and people from both sides of the argument, whether you are for same-sex marriage or opposed to same-sex marriage, both talk a lot about how everyday Australians feel about same-sex marriage. I decided that what I would do as a good psychologist and statistician is simply go to the data and check it out. here's what I found. According to Galaxy polling between 2009 and 2012, 64% of Australians support same-sex marriage. A Roy Morgan poll in 2011 found this number to be as high as 68%. According to a more conservative poll by News Limited, 65% of Australians support same-sex marriage, with the number rising to 72% among parents of young children, by far the largest group in this age group. For Aussies 18 to 24 years old, 81% support same-sex marriage, and of Christian Australians, 53% support same-sex marriage. This is what the data tells us. Returning to people in my own profession, health professionals, I really want to make the point that I'm not just this one individual evaluating the vast body of research. In fact, I stand alongside the many members of related disciplines. The Australian Psychological Society, comprising some 20,000 members, the American Psychological Association, which tops out at about 140,000 members, the American Academy of Pediatrics, with 60,000 members, the American Medical Association, with over 200,000 members, and the American Psychiatric Association, with over 30,000 members, have all independently reviewed the literature on same-sex marriage to make the conclusions that I have talked to you about tonight. There is clear harm done to same-sex attracted people worldwide by denying marriage equality, and there are clear benefits to allowing marriage equality. Further to this, there is no evidence that kids are at risk. From UQ, we added some research that shows that even an article opposing same-sex marriage can have a powerful impact on same-sex attracted people. So I thought that I would finish up my talk by using a little quote from someone whose support for same-sex marriage I think will have a lot of impact on lesbian and gay youth the world over. This is Barack Obama in 2012 when he said, "At a certain point, I've concluded that for me, it's important to go ahead and affirm that I think same-sex couples should be able to get married." No doubt something that will have had a powerful effect. Thank you, guys. Okay, so next off, I would like to welcome my dear colleague, Dr. Sharon Dane, to the stage.
I'm switched on.
The boys will make sure you're switched on. And
literally, yeah.
There we go. Perfect. Who will next be talking to us about her journey.
Am I switched on? No. Yes, I am. Oh, good. Okay. Normally, I would get up here and start talking about research because that's what I do. I'm also a social psychologist, and since 2003, I've been working in the area of the impact of social inclusion for sexual minorities and marriage equality in particular. But seeing as Fiona did such a lovely job, I'm free to relax and just talk about me and my personal life, which is what I'm going to do today. So there's my own personal journey going through a civil union and then into a same-sex marriage in Canada that I'll talk to you about and why I went from a civil union to a marriage. Back in 2005, actually, it was my mother who said to me, "Do you know you and Elaine can actually have a civil partnership in Britain?" Because we have dual citizenships. Both of us are Australian and British citizens. And we thought, well, this is great, but the cost of going to Britain, but we considered it. So we were getting all excited about perhaps flying all the way to Britain when my mother also found out that we could actually have it conducted here in Australia at the British Consulate. So on May the 6th, Elaine and I went to the British Consulate, and we were all excited because this was wonderful. Even though it wasn't recognised in Australia, it was the first piece of paper we could have to say that we were a legitimate couple, other than our Department of Transport piece of paper that recognised us as a couple for the fact that we didn't have to pay tax on a car or something like that. And we actually filed that away in our cabinet because that's all we had, a Department of Transport piece of paper. So anyway, we went to the consulate. The only, I guess, downside of it is when we went in there, we had to go into a corner room, and we were told privately that, do we know that under no certain, they would not be able to refer to it as marriage, which we already did, but they had to make a point of it. There was to be no music. It was quite sort of cold, I suppose you could say, right? But that was the best that was on offer, so we went out there. We weren't allowed to have any friends in the building. We were allowed to have our parents. And so apart from my parents and Elaine's mother, that was it. And we had two witnesses. So the only thing that actually made it feel like an event was the fact that we had so many press there. And this is probably what you won't see the press, but that's us there. And behind that picture was probably almost as many people in this room with cameras, okay? This was the result from the press. They wanted us to actually do a kiss, but we refused, so that was the best they got, okay? The reason it was such a big deal is because, unbeknownst to us, it was the first lesbian legal recognition of a partnership on Australian soil. So, although it was in the British consulate, hence it made headline news. So, happy as we were, we went off on a sort of like a little sort of honeymoon at Noosa. People recognized us actually, and we were saying congratulations from having seen the article, and also was on television. But as time went on, we tried to explain to people that we were in this UK civil partnership, and it became very difficult and sometimes frustrating because people didn't quite comprehend what it was. And when they found out it wasn't recognized in Australia, it was like, well, why did you bother? You know, it's not legal here, so why can't you just be a de facto couple like everyone else? So we tried to explain why it was important to us, but it became increasingly difficult, and we also noticed that some of our relatives, not immediate, but other relatives, didn't quite recognize it for what it was either. So we discussed amongst ourselves, we thought, well, we really need a holiday. We're going to go to Canada, Toronto. We thought, why don't we get married? So that was our plan. In 2008, we did just that. What we probably weren't prepared for is we were in a queue, a long queue, having to, show everyone our papers, even though it's all planned 3 months beforehand. And I remember clearly on that day looking around at everyone else in the room, and most people were opposite-sex couples. There were a few same-sex couples. But what struck me is we were just so ordinary. We were just like everybody else. There was no fanfare. I mean, we're just in the queue. We got the same forms, the same questions asked, absolutely no difference. We went into the room where we actually were married. That was beautiful. It was magnificent with music of our choice, flowers, everything. We could choose everything down to the letter. We could also have friends and family, but all our friends and family were in Australia because they couldn't afford to fly all the way to Canada. Secondly, my parents who are in their 80s and now almost 90 were too old to go that long journey. And my children, I have adult children, they certainly couldn't afford to fly there. So in one sense, it was wonderful, but in another, we lacked our family celebration, which is, we came away with a 3-minute video clip, which was something, but it would have been much nicer to have had it on Australian soil with our family. But I remember probably the most important thing of that was that the feeling that we were unconditionally included, right? When people go out of their way to do something special on their wedding day, to stand out and be different, it was the opposite. We were just so ordinary, and that was what made it so great. So the point, I guess, for us was we could come back to Australia and we said, we're married. Now, even though it's not legal here, just being able to say we're married made such a difference. Everybody understood what we were talking about. We didn't have to explain what it was. And even funnily enough, people didn't say, well, why did you bother saying it's not legal here? That didn't even come into it. It was just a universal language that everyone understood. And we were able to walk the street. We convey to everyone, we make it clear it's a Canadian marriage. So I like to make it, that it actually is a genuine marriage because, and not we're just calling it a marriage. But to us, we found that probably the most powerful thing was also our family. Okay, so when we had a civil union, we noticed that my mother didn't put any pictures up, even though we gave them to her. But after we got back from Canada with the marriage photos, they went up right away. Right? So, although I've never said that to her because I think she'd get upset about it, but it became very clear. And also Elaine's mother did the same. Our wedding photo is now up in her house as well. So it's just something about marriage that people take seriously, they understand it because they relate with it. Most people do. Civil unions, unfortunately, until that was, unless it was the norm, it's just not getting the same sort of recognition. And that brings me to the point of actually a story where I remember very clearly, I just actually realized I'm getting so carried away, that was the wedding. Okay, so that's that's the marriage in Canada in this absolutely beautiful room. But anyway, I should have flicked on that earlier. So with coming back to the story of actually, what was it now? Taking myself off track here. Oh yes, an example of why marriage is so important, at least for some people, and civil unions aren't quite the same, is an example I give of a photo I saw, a black and white photo, and it comes from the US Library, Congress Library. And the photo is taken back in about the 1940s, and it's a cafe, right? And in this cafe, you can see through the window, it's just one single cafe, but it has a door that says coloreds on it for blacks, and it has a door that says whites on it for whites. Now, the cafe is exactly the same. You can get the same food in there. There's the same menu, all right? So there is no difference in terms of the treatment, or what you get, I should say, when you're in the cafe. However, it's the symbolic thing about having to access it through two different doors, right? Now, very few people would say that's not discrimination. But civil unions and marriage is exactly the same thing. So, all right, you may have exactly the same legal rights, but it's symbolically different. You're making it so that these people are different from you. Now, there's nothing wrong with having two doors. There's nothing wrong with having civil unions and marriages, as long as both groups are allowed to walk through both doors. So that was my personal experience of why we moved from a UK civil partnership to a Canadian marriage, although we have both, not that we didn't stop our UK civil partnership. But for us, it was the social inclusion and the social perception that was important, not the legal rights. We have those through de facto relationships anyway. So the next part of my story is I'm also the Deputy National Convener for Australian Marriage Equality. The National Convener, Rodney Croom, is not able to make it today, but through that and my experience with the research I do, I was invited, and so was Elaine, to have dinner with the Prime Minister. And this was this year, in February this year, 2012. And that's us there at the lodge. Now, we sat down at the dinner table, and the idea was for us to start talking about marriage and why marriage was so important to us in my research. That was my main role. It took us a lot to get around the fact that we were sitting in the lodge looking at the Prime Minister having dinner. Sort of marriage went off the agenda for a while, and everyone said, oh, hang on, what are we here for? We had to come back and talk about it. So I had the opportunity of telling the Prime Minister, who literally was probably like that across from me at the dinner table, about why it was important, and also about the research findings that we found here, that for same-sex couples in Australia, it was a national survey, by the way, of every state and territory. For couples here, those who wanted to marry, which was the majority, the reasons why they said they wanted to marry is the fact that they felt devalued. Their relationships didn't equate to heterosexual relationships. And the more they felt that, the lower their level of well-being, psychological well-being. So I was able to convey that to her, and also some of my personal experiences. And towards the Prime Minister would say, yes, I understand that. There was nothing negative coming from the Prime Minister at all, okay? There was one thing that she said in the course of the evening that was very positive. And that was when I said to her, okay, given all the pressure that's happening internationally, like, we're now at, over 10, 11 countries in the world that have same-sex marriage. United States is now on the 10th state that now is going to legalize same-sex marriage. How is Australia just going to do nothing, stand there and not move? And she said, well, it's obviously going to be inevitable. So with that, we rushed off and told the press. Prime Minister just said it's going to be inevitable. And that's exactly what she said. So the one thing I didn't say, which I wish I had have done on that night, if you could wind time back, is for someone who herself doesn't believe in God, she does respect the right for the religious people to celebrate their beliefs and also, obviously, practice their religion. But also, the Prime Minister doesn't believe in marriage on a personal level. So I would like to, have asked her then that given you don't believe in marriage, why can't she respect the fact that some people want to celebrate marriage and believe it's important for them? But that'll have to wait for my next invitation. Okay.
So next on our list of speakers is Shelley Argent. Take it away, Shelley.
Actually, I was going to read from a little presentation that I did, but the others are being so brave, I'll do the same. So the thing that has got me interested in this, as Fiona said when she introduced me, is that I've got two sons, and one's straight and one's gay. And and a lot of people have the misbelief that, you know, to have gay children, they usually come from bad families, low socioeconomic, or there's been trauma or something in the family. But with my boys, I should say, I had the privilege of being a stay-at-home mum. And I was the one sort of mother who loved having the boys at home on holidays and doing all the things with them. And I really enjoyed their childhood, and they enjoyed being children. And I recognised James from about the age of 11, started to have these little mannerisms. And sounds funny to say, but it was him sitting at the telephone. And I used to think, don't sit like me, sit like your father. But the thing was, he was only, and I mean, that's stereotyping, but I could see it. And, but I still could see that he had absolutely no idea. He was just being himself. So if you were of the opinion that people choose to be gay, well, James blew that theory, because I could see it in him as a little boy. And then when he did come out, I realised very quickly that there's a difference between thinking you have a gay child and knowing, because then when you know, you have to deal with it. Now also, I was not the sort of parent that was thinking, oh my God, what will the neighbours think, and I can't tell people, and I failed as a parent. I mean, that to me is all nonsensical. But what I did do was I really worried, and I was absolutely fearful, and I cried for months and months. And it was all because James was literally our 1 in a million baby. We were told we'd have no children, we should adopt. And then James came along. And so to have this, what I felt was a special child, as gay, I just thought this isn't fair, because, you know, he's going to lead a difficult life, and all the stereotypes again, where he'll be ostracised and beaten up and all that stuff. And it was also at a time when AIDS-related illnesses were still a very big thing, and James came out in '95, and in Brisbane there were still 5 men a week dying from AIDS-related illnesses, and so I just didn't want him to be one of those. And so what I did was I went to work as a volunteer at the AIDS Council, which really opened my eyes, because I was and I'll tell one funny story. It was when I went for the interview, I went in a white and navy linen dress, and I had white and navy shoes and a white and navy handbag, and I was just so there, and and they didn't want to give me a position. And I said, why? And they said, oh, and they drew this little picture square around my face, and they said, oh, you're the stereotypical middle-class female. And I said, what does that mean, fat and 50? And they sort of went, oh, you could see discrimination, discrimination. And so what they did under much pressure was they gave me a job on the switch, which was their first mistake, because I was dreadful in the office and I was dreadful on switches. I could always disconnect somebody. And so then what they did was I then got further into it, and to cut a long story short, I ended up knowing more about the gay community and doing all the safe sex programs and HIV courses and stuff, that I knew a lot more about gay issues than some of the gay men that were doing the courses. And then, of course, also what I wanted to do was get to educate people and do some community education, and I started writing resources and things, because I felt this was a good way to break down barriers. And also too, just going back a little, when James first came out in 1995, it was only 5 years that Queensland had decriminalised homosexuality, so the only right that he had was the right to be gay. And for my, well, I call him the special boy because he was, you know, the 1 in a million, I just didn't think that was fair, and I just didn't want that to be his life. And also too, what happens, it's very interesting, you know, we live in this country and we think everybody's free and equal. And that is until somebody identifies as gay or lesbian and you suddenly realise this is not free and it is not equal. Because if it was equal, I wouldn't have to be standing here tonight justifying my son's sexuality and why he should be seen as equal to his brother. Because even though I've got the two boys and I love them equally, my straight son, really, just because he's heterosexual, doesn't make him a better person. It doesn't mean that he would be a better father than my gay son. Because my gay son, as I've said very often, he was the youngest police sergeant in Queensland. So he was obviously doing something right. And he had less rights than those that he kept in the Cairns watch house. Because he could have kept murder, which he did, murderers, rapists, pedophiles, you name it, whatever they'd done wrong, but they had the right to get married and they had the right to have children. So when people talk about how heterosexuals are just automatically better parents because the fit is there, I mean to say, I'm sorry, I really don't think that that's a given. It should be your approach to life, it should be your morals, your values, and just because somebody identifies as gay or lesbian, it doesn't mean that they lose their family values or their morals. They stay with them. And also too, as a parent, again, another reason that I do what I do is because I think, and I taught my boys to be very independent from a very early age, and I think there are times that you push your children forward to be independent, and as a parent there's times that you stand beside them. And then there are times like this where you stand in front of them, and this is what I do. And I think that it's extremely important for parents to stand up and be seen and not sit in the shadows, because this is what happens. When we had, you know, the Indigenous people didn't have equality, fine, but you could see them because they were coloured, so you knew how many were around. But you tell me, what does a gay person look like? Looks like you and me. And so there are so many more gay and lesbian in the community than anybody will ever know. We have many who are out. We have many who are very much closeted and for their own reasons do not come out. And this is really sad, because I am truly thankful with my son that he does choose to live his life honestly and openly, and he can be himself. But for those who do live in the closet, it is a very sad life for many, and I think that's where a lot of them, they move on to have the depression and the suicidal ideation and such things. And I'm going dry here, excuse me. I do talk a lot. I often think I could run my own courses on this. And so with my desire to have my son seen as equal, I've been doing this now, like I've been with the AIDS Council for about 16 years, I think. And then I moved on to PFLAG. And I was slightly involved with getting the de facto rights into Queensland with Peter Beattie. And I was very involved with Rodney Croom and a few others getting the removal of the economic discrimination in 2008 with Kevin Rudd. And I've been very busy, I was also involved with the surrogacy legislation in Queensland. I lobbied Anna Bligh with that. And also now there is the marriage equality. Now the thing that actually upsets me with that is not that we actually lost the vote when it was done a couple of months ago, but it was in the way that it was done. I mean, I'm getting political, which maybe is not a good thing. Is that all right? Oh, well, okay. Because what happened there, I felt, was, you know, if we'd all lost and it was free, everybody had a free vote or a conscience vote, as it was supposed to be, that would have been fine. But it wasn't. We had the coalition all vote as a block. And of course, then we had quite a few of the Labor members of Parliament also vote with Julia, because that was the correct thing to do. And then, of course, you then had some who just didn't believe in it, and that was fine. And so I just felt that that was really wrong when it should have been just a free vote. And I really think if Tony Abbott is going to be hopefully a decent leader when he gets elected next year, but I won't be voting for him, I think he would have had more credibility if he had allowed a true and free conscience vote. But that doesn't mean that we're giving up just because we lost the first round. As I say, we may have lost the battle, but we haven't lost the war. And as Sharon said, marriage equality is inevitable here. And I did, when I met Julia, I did ask her the question, why not, just because she doesn't believe in it, why not allow others? But she sort of hedged there. So, but anyway, so that's my story, so thank you.
I think it's fantastic that as part of the UQ Global Leadership Series, we've heard about the research and we've also heard two fantastic stories. For the last 20 minutes, I'm going to open the floor to questions. But before I get on to that, I would like to first issue an apology for Rodney Croom, the National Convener of Australian Marriage Equality. He was slated to be here tonight and very much wanted to be. Unfortunately, weather conditions in Melbourne prevented what I assume was the only plane that flew to Hobart this afternoon from doing so, and so he couldn't catch his flight. In addition, some legal issues surrounding the same-sex marriage debate are currently ongoing in Tasmania, so perhaps it's good he will be there. Having said that, myself, Sharon and Shelley will attempt to valiantly answer all your questions before we adjourn upstairs for wine, cheese and delicious foods. Sharon and Shelley, can you join me on these ominous podiums?
Okay, let me switch.
And in particular, if you have a question, if you could perhaps let us know to which of us it's directed.
Thanks very much to all three of you. That was very interesting and fun. I wonder if you'd be interested in commenting on how you see the next few years. I mean, what do you think would need to change for marriage equality to happen in Australia? I'm happy for all three of you to riff about that, but...
You can answer.
My personal opinion is we need members of parliament that have backbone and stand up for what they believe in. And this is what was part of the problem with the last vote. I had so many MPs say to me, yes, we agree with you, we support you, but. And so we need MPs who are brave enough to stand up.
Okay, also speaking on behalf of Australian marriage equality, a lot of the strategies that we're focusing on now is at the state level as well. So while, yes, the focus, I mean, we're still looking at the federal level, definitely, but in the meantime, we're looking at state level. So both in Tasmania and in New South Wales, okay, and South Australia. So both those three areas are looking into bringing in that into the legislation. People argue that that might not be constitutionally valid, but evidence suggests that it is. It may go to a high court, but that's fine. So it may have to go along those lines, as it has done in other places like Canada. It started off at a provincial level, I guess, and then, for example, the United States. The difference, I guess, with the United States is they don't have it at a federal level at all, a marriage recognition, where we do. So if we get it started at the state level, then that creates some sort of I guess it becomes even more ridiculous that we're, not pushing it at a federal level. So it'll just put additional pressure on. And if we get, I guess, a wall goes up this way, we go around this way, and we just will keep going until it happens. Yeah.
I'm sorry, we have microphones running down to you.
Thank you. When I was in the States recently, after marriage equality had been struck down in a few states and Defense of Marriage Acts had been supported, I was having dinner with Daryl Bem, who's a noted psychologist who's also gay, and he's very happy with the vote. And I said, how could you be happy with this vote when gay marriage was struck down in these states and Defense of Marriage, the traditional version of marriage, was upheld in these other states? And he said, yeah, but look at the demographics of the voters. Everyone who voted against gay marriage will be dead in 15 years. and the young people are voting almost overwhelmingly in favor of it. Now, I didn't hear any of those kinds of statistics here, and I wondered if the story is much the same here in Australia.
Definitely. All the news polls that we have coming out are showing that people who are opposed to same-sex marriage are overwhelmingly over the age of 50. Unfortunately, they don't break it down any further than that, because I'm 55 and I think it should be older than that. So it is a demographic thing. It's also, funnily enough, similar with same-sex couples or same-sex attracted people, that the younger they are, the more likely they want to marry as well. But the only problem is with waiting for older people to die is all those older same-sex couples who want to get married will be dead before they get to get married. So that's probably one of the main driving things, apart from the fact, we could sit back and say, look, this is inevitable because the rest of the world is going to make it ridiculous for Australia to stand and say no. But the sooner the better, because every day that goes by, a same-sex couple, either through illness or through old age, never get that dream to come true. So for that reason, yeah, I think waiting is not such a good thing.
I have been thinking about the age demographics a lot since I put them on my slides, and I was really interested to note that around that 70% of parents of young children support same-sex marriage, which is higher than almost any other group. And it made me think of some research done by my colleague, Dr. Brendan Zeech over there, where he looks at the heritability of sexuality. In short, is our sexuality, me being straight, someone else being gay, more about choice or more about our genetic material? Are we born this way? What he demonstrates is that sexuality is not an issue of choice, it's largely an issue of biology. And I've sort of been theorising about this 70% of parents of young children that support same-sex marriage and wondering if in fact this is because their children are at their young age and suddenly they're going, oh my goodness, there's a chance that my child could be gay. I really want to hedge my bets and make sure that marriage is legal for everyone. Anyway, an empirical question.
Even though the odds are not good. The odds are they will have a straight child.
The odds are they will have a straight child. It's always the odds are that they will have a straight child.
90% or more, yeah.
Or more than 90%.
Yeah.
Thanks very much, and I very much enjoyed your presentations, all three of you. I'd be interested to hear your comments on the fact that, or to ask whether or not you're aware whether anybody's doing any work on the capacity of organisations to utilise the exemptions of the Anti-Discrimination Act to discriminate legally against gay, lesbian people, and how that might intersect, for example, with legalisation of same-sex marriage. It seems to me there's a real problem if we have same-sex marriage made legal before we address the legal discrimination of same-sex couples who are legally married. It's a kind of a weird thing to have in a country.
Oh yeah, so you're saying that discrimination on what grounds?
It's legal, for example, to discriminate, to get an exemption underneath the Anti-Discrimination Act in Queensland,
yes,
on the basis of religion. If you have a religious organisation that wishes, for example, to employ people from a particular faith, and you can be fired from your job or on the basis, for example, that you are not living to the tenets of the faith. You're not fired because you're gay or lesbian, you're fired because you're not living to the tenets of the faith.
Okay.
Doesn't make much difference to
yeah,
the gay or lesbian person, it's just like their job, I might add, but that's
right,
the way it works.
Well, I agree. I don't know if allowing same-sex marriage is going to solve that problem. I mean, there's a lot of problems that it won't solve. But I can't see why you need to wait for one or the other. I mean, really, they should be addressed simultaneously. I don't see any benefit in sort of saying, well, we need to address one right before we address. I don't see how one is really going to interfere with the other. Allowing same-sex couples to marry, one would think, in the long term would actually probably be beneficial towards that argument rather than detract from it. But I often have said to people, like, it's not like the solution to everything. It's just part of the problem. And in countries where same-sex marriage is allowed, it hasn't solved every form of discrimination problem. And as the same as women are allowed to vote, it hasn't taken away a lot of gender problems. You know, and the same racial problems exist. So it just lessens it. We wouldn't want to go back to not voting. Sorry.
Look, tangentially, that is a good point. When I talked earlier about the research by Professor Meyer at Columbia University, the sort of experience that you're talking about is actually disproportionately common among gay and lesbian people, being fired or experiencing material hardship on the basis of their sexuality. And it's particularly linked to negative outcomes. While that's a comment, I just did want to highlight that.
My thanks to all three of you. I enjoyed you all speaking. My background is, I'd probably call myself an urbanite now, been in Brisbane for quite a few years, but my background is in regional Queensland. And I guess I still strongly identify with regional Queensland.
I'm from Warwick.
Oh, okay. If anyone's heard of Injune near Roma. I'm always interested in the demographic data. It seems to be so different to what's put in the media. But I guess a lot of the demographic data you've looked at has been age and other forms. But I'm interested to see if there's any data with urban people versus country people in their perceptions of marriage equality.
The data that we've done, or the data that we did in the Not So Private Life study, were only same-sex attracted participants. So it's interesting. What we did find from them, though, is it was the regional areas that perceived the most highest level of discrimination. But the small rural towns were okay, and the cities were okay. So it was the sort of like just, you know, the bigger sort of like regional towns where people were reporting that they felt more discriminated relative to cities and small. And what I guess you could say, when you're out there in a small rural town, you've got to be friends with everybody because there's not many of you. I mean, that's a hypothesis. And it's more like maybe a family. There are family units, smaller areas. But the regional areas, yes, that people perceived higher levels of discrimination. Different types of discrimination, though. People in the regional areas, same-sex attracted people living in regional Australia, reported more physical violence, whereas people in cities reported more verbal sort of tormenting, right? Which makes sense, I guess. You're more exposed in a city. You know, you're out there, you're more likely to be out, so you're probably, you know, confronting a lot of sort of, every now and again, people giving you dirty signs or something in the street. Whereas perhaps in the regional areas, less people are out, but when they do come out, they probably are likely to face more serious types of abuse. So, and that's what the data suggests anyway, yeah.
Yeah, typically we see a little less support in rural areas, and we often see, as you can see in the United States, that support and opposition to same-sex marriage is often broken up by location as much as anything else. We don't have any good data on rural Queensland, unfortunately, but I think it would be particularly important. I remember Bob Catter, who has a gay brother, Carl Catter, publicly claimed that there were no gay people whatsoever in his electorate. And where would he walk backwards
Discounting
from?
his half-brother. Well, it wasn't his electorate, though.
Oh, right, okay, yes. You know, I think that it really warrants some more research.
Speaking of Queensland, interestingly, though, with the survey we did, Queensland, same-sex attracted people in Queensland were the most likely to want to marry than any other state in Australia.
We're romantic people.
I put it down to maybe it's a more traditional state, so it works both ways. Same-sex attracted people are more traditional as well. Yeah.
Good evening, I'm Michael Ord, so I'm here from Australian Family Association and Lone Fathers Association. So just a bit of context first, so I'm sorry I'm going to spoil the party a little bit and have some different views. The context of why I got involved with Australian Family Association, the Lone Fathers Association, was because of the deterioration in our society's respect for marriage, and I guess you're mostly aware that, you know, there's high divorce rates and increased ex-nuptial, you know, children being born outside of birth, and it's been a deterioration in, you know, the respect for marriage, certainly since you've got no-fault divorce, which came in the mid-70s. Now, and that's all been detrimental for children, and modern society is about, you know, individuals chasing their own desires, consumerism, materialism, and all these sorts of things. So I guess I'm concerned that tonight we've heard, you know, a lot of adults in today's modern society, we're all victims, it's all about adults, and children are really suffering. So So I feel that, you know, claims for marriage equality and things like that is misguided. It's misleading. Marriage has a particular definition, and it goes back before predated religion in all states, and I don't think that's ever going to change. So it's unfortunate there's going to be an ongoing battle over this issue, and that's disappointing. I think there's probably a line that you're trying, you know, same-sex people need to get to in our society, as we all live in society together. But taking that line into claiming marriage is crossing the line. Marriage has a particular definition which goes back to man and woman, and it's necessary for a reasonable chain of generations. And we're starting to see evidence more so now that that some of the things that are happening in our society is not sustainable with the breakdowns and things like that. So I think it's quite odd that a group is coming forward and saying we want marriage, and it's really about that emotional and love bond that it's being claimed, but that's not the purpose of marriage. So I think you've got a problem there, and it's going to be an ongoing problem.
Michael?
And I guess I'll come to a question. But do you think that just because some people feel, you know, a particular group of people feel that they're suffering because they can't have marriage, when marriage is really not about adults, it's really about the future of our society and children, is that enough alone to push and create this division in our society and this battle that's going to be ongoing over it, and the risks that it does put our society at? Because Western society is suffering a bit at the moment. So I think, do you really feel it's enough alone to do what you're doing, and the division that it's going to ongoing create in our society?
Thank you for your question. Michael, I actually think that you and I agree on a number of core points. In particular, the research very clearly shows that children do fare best when they have a two-parent family. This is probably for a variety of reasons. Mum and dad can have support from one another. When times are tough and teenagers are horrible, they can debrief, etc. But the research shows that this benefit is to a two-parent family, whether it's two mums or two dads. I care about kids. I care about marriage. But I have to look at the facts. That little baby girl or that little baby boy does best with a married set of parents. That's what the research tells me. All issues aside of whether marriage is about love and commitment and fidelity or whether it's about children, I can tell you the facts on this, that two mums or two dads raise happy, healthy children, and two mums and two dads raise children better than a single parent on average, for whatever reason. A mum and a dad make excellent, wonderful parents for a kid, especially when they're a happy marriage. I actually have my mum and my dad in the audience here who have been married 36 years. I'm a great fan of married parents, and I think we're on the same page there. I'm a great fan of kids' health, but the research says that gay parents are good.
The other thing I'd like to add to that argument is it becomes nonsensical in some respect, because same-sex attracted people have had children, are having children, and will continue to have children irrespective of whether they get married or not. So it's not really addressing the children problem or that you're raising. That's still there. If you think that's a problem, that's not going to go away because you don't allow them to get married. The only difference is those children won't be able to call their parents married. I mean, it's no longer that it's considered taboo to have children out of wedlock. So how is denying same-sex couples the right to marry going to affect children, because they're going to be there anyway?
Thank you all very much. It's been very interesting. Sharon, I'm wondering, having gone overseas and got married overseas and then coming back to Australia, what are some of the issues that you've faced with not having that special bond recognised in this country? There must be some practical issues that...
Well, we haven't been in a position to face any practical issues in terms of legal issues. There is an issue in the sense that de facto couples, if you're same-sex attracted and you're de facto, it's a lot easier for your relation to be contested in court because you have to prove that you're not flatmates or best friends, that you actually are a couple. Whereas if you are opposite-sex couples, they don't really accuse you of being flatmates. So it's like you've got that extra effort to prove that you are together. We haven't been in a position where we've had to do that. We haven't been challenged by that. That's probably why, in the absence of marriage, civil unions are important. So at least it's a piece of paper that say, yes, we genuinely are a romantic couple, we're not flatmates. So, and that's why some people are at least having civil unions. Well, there's two reasons. Some people just don't want to be married, and others are doing it as a form of protection until such time as they can get married. But in terms of our own experience, it's really been all social. It's about it not being recognized as the real thing, that our relationship almost was like, almost like we may as well have been flatmates. So it's when we were able to say we were married, it just made sense to everyone around us. And I mean, particularly heterosexual people. It was their language. They understood it. Our families, a lot of our friends. And for us, I guess, that was hugely important. For some people, it's less important. But for us, we wanted our relationship to be considered the same. My partner has had to go to 3 weddings for her brother, who's heterosexual. We've had to sit there, well, I haven't, I've only been to 2 of his, but she's had to be to 3. And we have to sit there about how marriage is only between a man and a woman, while we sit there and we are married, but not legally in this country. And that's a little bit hard to swallow sometimes. You know, and so for us, it's yes, we are valued. Our relationship is recognized at the same level. And that is, I think, predominantly why same-sex couples want to get married. A lot of them are not religious, so it's not for religious reasons. And I'd like to clarify, we're talking about civil marriage here, not religious marriage. Although for people who are religious and want to be married, then that's fine if their religions choose to marry them. And there are several I guess, denominations in Australia now, the more progressive churches, that are happy to marry same-sex couples. So it's the legislation being put forward now at a federal and state level is to a clause that allows religions to say, no, we don't want to marry same-sex couples, but for those who do, that they would be allowed to, right? So it's trying to make, I guess, tease the religious part of it out. And when we talk about, I think this Michael, is it? Mentioning that it's not about love marriage. Well, since the Industrial Revolution, it has been. You know, if you look at the history of marriage, it very much changed during the Industrial Revolution. It became romance, and people started getting married because of personal fulfillment. That happened back then, and it happened because of heterosexuals, because same-sex couples were out of the question back then. So that shift from the Industrial Revolution to now has been changed by heterosexual couples. Prior to that, it was often about obligation. You got married and practicalities. Yeah.
Okay, I think we might have time for one more question, followed by a lot of informal questions and chit-chat over wine. Okay, so thank you.
It's Wendell Rosevear. I want to speak to the issue of institutionalised homophobia. Until 1997, rape was defined as unlawful carnal knowledge of a female in Queensland, and so it's rooted on a judge saying 300 years ago that it's impossible for a man to be raped unless he would fight to the death. And so if he didn't fight to the death, he must have either wanted it or he must be gay and therefore deserved it. And so I work with 1,100 men who've been raped or sexually abused, and that homophobia means those men can't ask for help for the secondary stigma of being seen as not a man or else to be gay and to be re-victimised. My patient Michael was murdered down at Manly, and so he precipitated the anti-vilification laws in Queensland, and I worked with the perpetrators of his murder in jail, and they had internalised homophobia where they felt they had to bash him to prove that they weren't gay. And so I even see in this current government, the government seeks to silence non-government funded organisations that lobby for law change, and so we've got institutionalised homophobia. And so while we have that, we have what I've seen as 8 homophobic murders where the origins of the murder, and we even see homophobia as a defence for murder, still maintained in Queensland. So my basic point is that love is not a threat, but hate is a threat, and we need to work together to have a society that values all people and respects honesty. And so getting rid of homophobia by making relationships available to be respected, whether it's your personal choice or not, is part of building a safe society, whoever you are and whatever you believe. And even the minority Christians who are bigoted against that need to realise that their rights have to be supported by a government standing up for their rights in the future if it's not a dominant Christian society we live in.
Actually, I think even marriage is important as a family, because now, like, I have my 2 boys. Now, to me, it's extremely sad that my gay son, his partner will never actually ever be officially our son-in-law if they should ever choose to marry. And he will never be a son-in-law in our family or a brother-in-law or whatever. It's always about inclusion. And that's what it's so important, because it's not just the legal stuff. It's about inclusion, it's about self-respect, it's how marriages are celebrated. And again, as Fiona was saying earlier, cohabitation is not the same. It doesn't have the same impact on a relationship. People will leave if it gets a bit tough. But when it comes to marriage, there's still a lot of divorces, but people still try and work it out more. And I think it's about inclusion, it's about respect, it's about a whole lot of issues. It's not just about children, and it's not just about rights, because I see marriage as a privilege, and it's something that we as straights take for granted, and we shouldn't. Because when others are wanting to be part of it, we should be encouraging them. We should not be discouraging, because we know the benefits as a whole to society. As Fiona was saying before, there's less depression, there's less suicide, there's better mental health. I mean, as a parent, isn't that what we want for our children? We want them to be happy in their relationships. We want them to have good mental health. And it's also, it shows they're generally even more financial, because they're sort of living together as a unit. There is so many things that we as straights take for granted and never consider. They're just there. But with our children, and maybe some here in the audience who would like to be part of the club, it is very important, and it means so much to them. It's a privilege. It shouldn't be a right for us as well, because we all know there are some dreadful straights who get married and do dreadful things to the children. So it's not a given that just because you're straight you're going to be a good parent. I mean, it's some terrible damage done. And so I just think we really need to open our minds a little bit more, remove the fear and the myths that we live by and live with, and see it for what it is. Marriage has evolved. I mean, we remember that there was a time before 1967 that the Indigenous just couldn't get married. They had to seek permission. Now, I just laugh because my straight son is now engaged to a Taiwanese girl. 30 years ago, that would have been absolutely frowned upon. Now it is nothing. So, I mean, we do need to open our minds and our hearts and just be a little bit kinder, I think, to everybody.
Look, I think that's a really nice point to finish on, and I think your story certainly gave a face and a voice to some of the statistics I've been talking about tonight. Look, I want to finish just by thanking so much our guest speakers, Sharon and Shelley. I think it's been a fantastic evening, and you've been great. I invite you all to come and drink and eat with me and talk same-sex marriage.
Thank you,
everyone.
I have one drink.